At the end of last backpacking season, after wanting it for over 3 years, I finally pulled the trigger and bought the Zpacks plexamid. I've had some requests to talk about this tent and what I like about it, so I figured I would do that today. I'm dog sitting right now. This is Pazzo. Pazzo, don't get in my tent. And they have a nice big yard, so I figured this was the time to set it up before I'm actually out on the trail and tell you guys more about the tent, what I like about it, why I wanted it, etc. If you guys hear any clucking in the background, this is why. So I was really debating between the plexamid and the duplex for a long time. I initially wanted the duplex, and the reason that I wanted it is because when I was through hiking the Appalachian Trail, I had a Big Agnes Fly Creek 2 tent. It was a great starter tent. I have no complaints about it. I actually didn't even purchase it. I traded some people for it out on trail, and it served me well for the entire AT and for some time after that. But there was this very particular night that made me really want a Zpacks tent, and I just could not get the idea of getting the Zpacks tent out of my head. So it was in Pennsylvania. My friend Head Chef and I were out at a campsite by ourselves. The rest of our trail family was in a shelter, and we were up on this ridge. I don't remember exactly what shelter it was, but it was up on a ridge in Pennsylvania. And we had this like crazy rainstorm come in overnight. There was like thunder, there was lightning. It was insane. It was literally sitting over us for like hours. I'm not kidding you. And we ended up getting like 5 inches of rain that night. So Chef is like texting me from his tent being like, hey, are you okay over there? And I'm like, no, because I laid there and I just watched the water come farther and farther and farther up my tent. Luckily, I had enough time to get everything into dry bags, but ultimately I had to move my tent to higher ground in the middle of this rainstorm twice. Meanwhile, my friend Chef was in his Zpacks duplex tent, literally just floating around the campsite. He was watching movies on his phone. He was talking to his ex-girlfriends on the phone. It was ridiculous. Meanwhile, there I was, just like continuously having to move to higher ground. I was in all my rain gear. I was having to be like out in this storm. And he was like, it's really comfortable in here. It feels like a waterbed. It's great. Like just floating on the top of all the water. It was crazy. So ever since that time, I have wanted a Zpacks tent. And the reason that this tent does so well against rain is because the fabric is waterproof, and also it has a bathtub floor. So when Chef was floating around in his tent, he has this bathtub floor set up where the rain didn't get up over the bathtub floor, and so again, it just floated. Bonus, these are like the lightest backpacking tents out on the market. So this tent, the plexamid, the one that I have in blue, is only 14.8 ounces. That, however, does not include tent stakes. And instead of using tent poles, you actually use one of your trekking poles to set it up. So obviously the weight of the trekking pole doesn't count because I use my trekking poles all day, every day while I'm backpacking and even just while I'm on day hikes. So obviously that weight is not going in my backpack, but the tent stakes do add a little bit depending on which ones you got. I got super light titanium ones, so I will try to look actually after I'm done filming and come back and tell you guys how much the tent stakes weigh. But the tent itself, only 14.8 ounces, which is insane. The duplex, on the other hand, weighs a little bit more. It weighs 19 ounces. Okay, I double checked, and the stakes that I have are the 6-inch ultralight titanium stakes from Zpacks, and they weigh 0.19 ounces each. So you gotta say that times 10. So add on another 1.9 ounces to the 14.8 of the tent. And that still makes it just over a pound. Super light. Because with my Big Agnes tent on the AT, that's one of their lightest tents, and that's considered like a pretty light backpacking tent. And that tent weighed like 2.5 pounds. So to go from 2.5 pounds to less than a pound in my tent is freaking incredible. By the way, don't mind Pazzo wandering around. This is his domain after all. And he's a very curious dog. Like he loves to just like follow me around and hang out. And if I'm doing something, he's like following me around watching me, trying to figure out what that is. So as I mentioned, I was really debating between getting the plexamid, which is the 1-person tent, and getting the duplex, which is the 2-person tent. Hey, come on, get out of my tent. I'm kind of a person who likes a little bit of extra space. I like to be able to put my backpack next to me. I like the option to have, you know, a friend come and stay in my tent if they want to. But the reason that I ultimately went with the plexamid over the duplex is, well, number one, the plexamid is a little bit lighter. But number two, and this was actually the huge reason for me, is that the plexamid only takes one trekking pole to set it up. The duplex takes two. And as I mentioned, I always like to have the option to have my trekking poles with me when I'm hiking or backpacking. And sometimes I will go out on backpacking trips and I'll set up my tent and then hike up to another destination, like up to a peak or something like that. Or maybe there's a water source that's really far away. Or I just want to go do some exploring, like outside of the campsite. And so I wanted the option to have at least one trekking pole left to take out on these side excursions. And so that was the real selling point for me with this tent, is that I would still have a free trekking pole for side excursions after I set up my tent. And I've only had this tent, like I said, since the end of last backpacking season. I've only taken it out on a couple of trips, and already I've just been really happy that I made that decision. Another difference between this tent and the duplex is that this tent only has one vestibule and one opening. Obviously, that's because it's only intended for one person, so why would you need two? But the duplex actually has two. It has one on each side. So if you are sharing a tent with someone, then you don't have to climb over each other in the night to go use the restroom or something like that. But being that I'm the only one sleeping in this tent, no issues there. So this tent comes in several colors, and initially I was not going to get blue. First of all, because pretty much like most of the people you see out on the trail with Zpacks tents have the blue tents. Second of all, I had a dream that I was gonna hike the CDT with my friend Chef, and I had this tent, but it was burnt orange. So I thought, okay, that's a sign I have to get the burnt orange tent, and that means that Chef and I will someday hike the CDT together, which I would love. However, it turns out that most people on trail have blue, probably because, first of all, it's the cheapest color to get. Second of all, it is the lightest color to get. So all of the other color tents were a little bit more expensive and a little heavier than the blue color. So ultimately, it seemed more practical to get the blue. I will note that with the blue, the tent is a little bit see-through. You can see the outlines of what is in the tent when the sun is shining through it. You can't see someone necessarily, like, you know, if I'm naked in the tent, like people aren't going to be able to see all of me or anything like that. But it is one thing about the tent I don't really like, is I wish it was a little bit more opaque, but I'm guessing that has to do with why the tent is lighter. It's probably a little bit thinner. They're probably not adding an extra coat of color on it. And I would rather have the tent be lighter, I guess, than be a bit more, you know, opaque. So it is what it is, but just note that if you are a person who really, really values your privacy and you don't want people to know if you're in your tent or not, then maybe blue is not the color for you. This tent is made from DCF, Dyneema composite fabric, which used to be known as Cuban fiber. It's a waterproof material, and it's only a single wall tent, which of course has this mesh door. And a lot of people have issue with the fact that it's only a single wall tent. I have not had an issue with it. I'm just not a person who produces a lot of my own heat. I have told you guys in other videos, I run really cold on the trail. I'm not a person that's probably going to be roasting in my tent. And when I was on the AT with the Big Agnes, I never, maybe one or two times when it was really, really storming, got any amount of condensation in my tent. My friend Ibex also had a Big Agnes, and she had condensation in her tent like every single night. So I've been out in this tent in a big rainstorm, and I have gotten no condensation in it whatsoever. So far it has not been an issue for me. I will be taking this tent while I'm out through hiking the Colorado Trail this summer. So if I notice that changes, if I do start getting a lot of condensation, because like summer here is monsoon season and we tend to get a lot of storms, then I will let you guys know. But so far my experience is like no issue with condensation at all. I did actually last summer, my Big Agnes tent broke, which is why I decided to pull the trigger on this tent, but it took a few weeks for this tent to get to me. So I borrowed my friend Pika's Gossamer Gear The One tent, which is a very similar setup. It's also not a freestanding tent. You also have to use trekking poles to set it up, but it's a different fabric. But anyway, so I borrowed that tent from her for a few backpacking trips before I finally got this to me. And I actually did have a big problem with condensation with that tent. Again, that's a different fabric, it's a different manufacturer. Obviously, like the setup of the tent is not exactly the same, even though it's pretty similar. But with that single wall tent, I did actually have big issues with condensation. And I just generally did not, even though that tent was kind of similar to this one, I was just really not the biggest fan in general of that tent. Aside from having condensation issues, like pretty much every time I took it out, I also had it fall down on me in the night one time. That could have been user error, but it just, if that is user error, then it's more complicated than it needs to be. And I've been in a big windstorm in this tent and had zero issues. So I mean, I know some people really love the one, and I'm a fan of Gossamer gear. I have a Gossamer gear pack, the Mariposa, and I'm obsessed with it. I just really, really love that pack. But comparing this tent to the one, I like this one a lot better. This is a quite costly tent, which is a reason that it took me so long after I decided I wanted this tent to actually buy it. The thing that finally triggered me buying this is just that my old tent busted, and I was like, the same month that it busted, I had a lucrative Instagram collaboration, so I actually used the money that I made on the Instagram collaboration to purchase the tent. I just double checked the price on the Zpacks website, and if you were to buy this tent brand new, it would cost you $549, whereas the duplex costs $699. And that does not obviously include your trekking poles, your stakes, your stake bag, anything like that. It's just the tent itself. So it's definitely a pricey tent for sure. And to set this tent up, you need a minimum of 6 stakes, but it's better to have 10 basically. And I generally use 10 whenever I set it up. I don't use an additional ground sheet with this tent. Zpacks says that you don't have to. The floor is actually a little bit thicker material than the rest of the tent, but if you wanted to, Zpacks does have one for sale for $125. And that ground sheet is also made from DCF. So I have plenty of headroom in this tent. Like, I can sit straight up when I'm in the tent, but I'm only 5'3", so if you are a little taller, Zpacks also makes this tent but a little taller. It's called the Altiplex. And I find that inside the tent, I have plenty of space for myself. Like, I'm not cramped in there at all. I have a little bit of space on both sides of me, and then I also have like a lot of space above my head and below my feet. So I actually store my backpacking gear while I'm asleep below my feet, and it's not uncomfortable at all. Like, I have plenty of space. Okay, so I'm inside my tent, and I would say I probably have a foot beneath my feet when I'm laying down, and about that much behind my head as well. Sorry, it's like really awkward to show you guys actually when I'm laying down my head, so just take my word for it. One other thing I should mention is that you have to be really careful when you're setting this tent up that your bathtub stays on this side of the overhead tent. Sorry, it's like so bright in here. Because if you don't, then water could end up going inside the tent, like inside the bathtub, if it's not covered by the other part of the tent. And there's Pazzo. He's creeping at me because I zipped up the tent so he can't come inside. And then I should also mention that inside the tent is pretty bare bones. Like, there's not a lot of extras in here as you'd imagine from an ultralight tent, but it does have this one little mesh pocket, which I appreciate. So that's right by the door. So I'll put things in there like my contact solution, my glasses, my headlamp, anything I might need in the night. And by the way, Zpacks does actually have a new, even lighter one-person tent. It's the Plex Solo tent, and that only weighs 13.9 ounces. So it's a little bit lighter than this one, the plexamid, and apparently it packs up a little bit smaller as well. This is the size of my plexamid when it's all packed up. It looks like the Plex Solo is a little bit pricier at $599. I really can't comment on how that one is different aside from the weight and how small it packs up, because I haven't tried that tent yet myself. But if you have tried it, if you own that tent or you've tried it, I'd be curious to learn more about it. So let me know down in the comments what you think. Let me show you how I set this baby up. You're gonna need, obviously, the tent, as well as 10 stakes and 1 trekking pole. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do, obviously, is lay your tent flat out on the ground, and then you're gonna wanna take the first 4 stakes and you're gonna stake out the corners of the tent at about a 45-degree angle. I assume when I'm finished, I'm gonna have to adjust some of the stakes as well as the guy lines, so I don't pound the stakes all the way into the ground. at first go. I just sort of lightly put them in so that if a wind gust comes along or something, my tent's not going to blow away, the stakes aren't going to blow out of the ground, but I don't put them all the way in the ground at first. Next, you are going to take your trekking pole and you're going to put it up into its little pocket, and then you're going to stake out the front and the back of the tent. By the way, Zpacks recommends that you set up your trekking pole at about 122 centimeters. If you don't have trekking poles and you don't want to carry trekking poles, you can actually buy a tent pole, but I always use trekking poles, so I'm happy to just use my trekking pole and not have the extra weight. And I find that it works best for me if I actually have my trekking pole set a little below 122. I actually hike with my poles at 115, and I find that works best for me. For even, not just for hiking, I mean for setting up the tent. Then you're going to take your 4 remaining stakes and you're going to stake out the remaining guy lines. And then, of course, you can go back and adjust the stakes and adjust the guy lines as needed, pound your stakes in. And if you're gonna deal with like a windstorm or a thunderstorm, sorry, I have hair in front of my face, then you also might want to put some rocks up on top of the stakes just to make sure that they are secure. Or it might also be helpful to do that if you're on ground where you can't get your stakes all the way in, or you're on like sandy or silty ground or something like that. By the way, this is totally up to your preference, but I really recommend getting tent stakes with the orange heads because I have lost so many silver tent stakes, so many. And I always find a bunch, like I lose one and then I find one at a different camp. So I know that I'm not the only person. These are just so much easier to see. I really recommend these orange ones. And I will also put a link to a Zpacks video of Zpacks guys setting up this tent because like I'm not a professional, you know, and if you guys are actually going to set this tent up, you might want to watch the professional video, but I just wanted to give you a demonstration of how it's pretty easy and how it works. So that's my plexamid, you guys. What else do you want to know about it? Anything? Let me know. Drop it in the comments. If you have a tent that you love, I would love to hear what it is and why you love it. So also drop that in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel for more hiking, backpacking, Appalachian Trail, and Colorado content. And like I said, I'll be hiking the Colorado Trail this summer. It's about a 500-mile trail that goes from Littleton to Durango. So if you're interested in that trail, definitely subscribe. And thanks for being here, you guys. I'll talk to you next time.